Hi, and welcome to Storytime with Bubbo. Now it's time to continue with The Marvelous Land of Oz by L. Frank Baum, Chapter 4. Tip makes an experiment in magic. The boy, small and rather delicate in appearance, seemed somewhat embarrassed at being called father by the tall, awkward, pumpkin-headed man. But to deny the relationship would involve another long and tedious explanation, so he changed the subject by asking abruptly, "Are you tired?" "Of course not," replied the other. "But," he continued after a pause, "it is quite certain I shall wear out my wooden joints if I keep on walking." Tip reflected, as they journeyed on, that this was true. He began to regret that he had not constructed the wooden limbs more carefully and substantially. Yet how could he have ever guessed that the man he had made merely to scare old Mombi with would be brought to life by means of a magical powder contained in an old pepper box? So he ceased to reproach himself and began to think how he might yet remedy the deficiencies of Jack's weak joints. While thus engaged, they came to the edge of a wood, and the boy sat down to rest upon an old sawhorse that some woodcutter had left there. "Why don't you sit down?" he asked the Pumpkinhead. "Won't it strain my joints?" inquired the other. "Of course not. It'll rest them," declared the boy. So Jack tried to sit down, but as soon as he bent his joints farther than usual, they gave way altogether, and he came clattering to the ground with such a crash that Tip feared he was entirely ruined. He rushed to the man, lifted him to his feet, straightened his arms and legs, and felt of his head to see if by chance it had become cracked. But Jack seemed to be in pretty good shape after all, and Tip said to him, "I guess you'd better remain standing hereafter. It seems the safest way." "Very well, dear father, just as you say," replied the smiling Jack, who had been in no wise confused by his tumble. Tip sat down again. Presently the Pumpkinhead asked, "What is that thing you are sitting on?" "Oh, this is a horse," replied the boy carelessly. "What is a horse?" demanded Jack. "A horse? Why, there are two kinds of horses," returned Tip, slightly puzzled how to explain. "One kind of horse is alive. It has 4 legs and a head and a tail, and people ride upon its back." "I understand," said Jack cheerfully. "That's the kind of horse you are now sitting on." "No, it isn't," answered Tip promptly. "Why not? That one has 4 legs and a head and a tail." Tip looked at the sawhorse more carefully and found that the Pumpkinhead was right. The body had been formed from a tree trunk, and a branch had been left sticking up at one end that looked very much like a tail. In the other end were 2 big knots that resembled eyes, and a place had been chopped away that might easily been mistaken for a horse's mouth. As for the legs, they were 4 straight limbs cut from trees and stuck fast into the body, being spread wide apart so that the sawhorse would stand firmly when a log was laid across it to be sawed. "This thing resembles a real horse more than I imagined," said Tip, trying to explain. "But a real horse is alive and trots and prances and eats oats, while this is nothing more than a dead horse made of wood and used to saw logs upon." "If it were alive, wouldn't it trot and prance and eat oats?" inquired the Pumpkinhead. "It would trot and prance, perhaps, but it wouldn't eat oats," replied the boy, laughing at the idea. "And of course it can't ever be alive because it is made of wood." "So am I," answered the man. Tip looked at him in surprise. "Why, so you are," he exclaimed, "and the magic powder that brought you to life is here in my pocket." He brought out the pepper box and eyed it curiously. "I wonder," said he musingly, "if it would bring the Sawhorse to life." "If it would," returned Jack calmly, for nothing seemed to surprise him, "I could ride on its back, and that would save my joints from wearing out." "I'll try it," cried the boy, jumping up. "But I wonder if I can remember the words old Mombi said, and the way she held her hands up." He thought it over for a minute, and as he had watched carefully from the hedge every motion of the old witch and listened to her words, he believed he could repeat exactly what she had said and done. So he began by sprinkling some of the magic powder of life from the pepper box upon the body of the Sawhorse. Then he lifted his left hand with the little finger pointing upward and said, "Wogue." "What does that mean, dear father?" asked Jack curiously. "I don't know," answered Tip. Then he lifted his right hand with the thumb pointing upward and said, "Tog." "What's that, dear father?" inquired Jack. "It means you must keep quiet," replied the boy, provoked at being interrupted at so important a moment. "How fast I am learning," remarked the Pumpkinhead with his eternal smile. Tip now lifted both hands above his head, with all the fingers and thumbs spread out, and cried in a loud voice, "Pug!" Immediately the Sawhorse moved, stretched its legs, yawned with its chopped-out mouth, and shook a few grains of the powder off its back. The rest of the powder seemed to have vanished into the body of the horse. "Good!" called Jack, while the boy looked on in astonishment. "You are a very clever sorcerer, dear father." Wow, that's the end of chapter 5. Wow. I can't believe he brought the Sawhorse to life with the magic powder of life. Chapter 5, Awakening of the Sawhorse. The Sawhorse, finding himself alive, seemed even more astonished than Tip. He rolled his naughty eyes from side to side, taking a first wondering view of the world in which he had now so important an existence. Then he tried to look at himself, but he had indeed no neck to turn, so that in the endeavor to see his body, he kept circling around and around without catching even a glimpse of it. His legs were stiff and awkward, for there were no knee joints in them, so that presently he bumped against Jack Pumpkinhead and sent that personage tumbling upon the moss that lined the roadside. Tip became alarmed at this accident, as well as at the persistence of the Sawhorse in prancing around in a circle, so he called out, "Whoa, whoa there!" The Sawhorse paid no attention whatever to this command, and the next instant brought one of his wooden legs down upon Tip's foot so forcibly that the boy danced away in pain to a safer distance, from where he again yelled, "Whoa, whoa, I say!" Jack had now managed to raise himself to a sitting position, and he looked at the Sawhorse with much interest. "I don't believe the animal can hear you," he remarked. "I shout loud enough, don't I?" answered Tip angrily. "Yes, but the horse has no ears," said the smiling Pumpkinhead. "Sure enough," exclaimed Tip, noting the fact for the first time. "How then am I going to stop him?" But at that instant the Sawhorse stopped himself, having concluded it was impossible to see his own body. He saw Tip, however, and he came close to the boy to observe him more fully. It was really comical to see the creature walk, for it moved the legs on its right side together and those on its left side together as a pacing horse does, and that made its body rock sideways like a cradle. Tip patted it upon the head and said, good boy," in a coaxing tone, and the Sawhorse pranced away to examine with its bulging eyes the form of Jack Pumpkinhead. "I must find a halter for him," said Tip, and having made a search in his pocket, he produced a roll of strong cord. Unwinding this, he approached the Sawhorse and tied the cord around its neck, afterward fastening the other end to a large tree. The Sawhorse, not understanding this action, stepped backward and snapped the string easily, but it made no attempt to run away. "He's stronger than I thought," said the boy, "and rather obstinate, too." "Why don't you make him some ears?" asked Jack. "Then you can tell him what to do." "That's a splendid idea," said Tip. "How did you happen to think of it?" "Why, I didn't think of it," answered the Pumpkinhead. "I didn't need to, for it's the simplest and easiest thing to do." So Tip got out his knife and fashioned some ears out of the bark of a small tree. "I mustn't make them too big," he said as he whittled, "or our horse would become a donkey." "How is that?" inquired Jack from the roadside. "Why, a horse has bigger ears than a man, and a donkey has bigger ears than a horse," explained Tip. "Then if my ears were longer, would I be a horse?" asked Jack. "My friend," said Tip gravely, "you'll never be anything but a pumpkinhead, no matter how big your ears are." "Oh," returned Jack, nodding, "I think I understand." "If you do, you're a wonder," remarked the boy. "But there's no harm in thinking you understand. I guess these ears are ready now. Will you hold the horse while I stick them on?" "Certainly, if you'll help me up," said Jack. So Tip raised him to his feet, and the Pumpkinhead went to the horse and held its head while the boy bored 2 holes in it with his knife blade and inserted the ears. "They make him look very handsome," said Jack admiringly. But those words, spoken close to the Sawhorse, and being the first sounds he had ever heard, so startled the animal that he made a bound forward and tumbled Tip on one side and Jack on the other. Then he continued to rush forward as if frightened by the clatter of his own footsteps. "Whoa!" shouted Tip, picking himself up. "Whoa! You idiot! Whoa!" The Sawhorse would probably have paid no attention to this, but just then it stepped a leg into a gopher hole and stumbled head over heels to the ground, where it lay upon its back, frantically waving its 4 legs in the air. Tip ran up to it. "You're a nice sort of horse, I must say," he exclaimed. "Why didn't you stop when I yelled, 'Whoa'?" "Does 'whoa' mean to stop?" asked the Sawhorse in a surprised voice, as it rolled its eyes upward to look at the boy. "Of course it does," answered Tip. "And a hole in the ground means to stop also, doesn't it?" continued the horse. "To be sure, unless you step over it," said Tip. "What a strange place this is," the creature exclaimed, as if amazed. "What am I doing here, anyway?" "Why, I brought you to life," answered the boy, "but it won't hurt you any if you mind me and do as I tell you." "Then I will do as you tell me," replied the Sawhorse humbly. "But what happened to me a moment ago? I don't seem to be just right, some way." "You're upside down," explained Tip. "But just keep those legs still a minute and I'll set you right side up again." "How many sides have I?" asked the creature wonderingly. "Several," said Tip briefly, "but do keep those legs still." The Sawhorse now became quiet and held its legs rigid so that Tip, after several efforts, was able to roll him over and set him upright. "I seem all right now," said the queer animal with a sigh. "One of your ears is broken," Tip announced after a careful examination. "I'll have to make a new one." Then he led the Sawhorse back to where Jack was vainly struggling to regain his feet, and after assisting the Pumpkinhead to stand upright, Tip whittled out a new ear and fastened it to the horse's head. "Now," said he, addressing his steed, "pay attention to what I'm going to tell you. Whoa means to stop. Get up means to walk forward. Trot means to go as fast as you can. Understand?" "I believe I do," returned the horse. "Very good. We are all going on a journey to the Emerald City to see His Majesty the Scarecrow, and Jack Pumpkinhead is going to ride on your back so he won't wear out his joints." "I don't mind," said the Sawhorse. "Anything that suits you suits me." Then Tip assisted Jack to get upon the horse. "Hold on tight," he cautioned, "or you may fall off and crack your pumpkin head." "That would be horrible," said Jack with a shudder. "What shall I hold on to?" "Why, hold on to his ears," replied Tip after a moment's hesitation. "Don't do that," remonstrated the Sawhorse, "for then I can't hear." That seemed reasonable, so Tip tried to think of something else. "I'll fix it," he said at length. He went into the wood and cut a short length of a limb from a young stout tree. One end of this he sharpened to a point, and then he dug a hole in the back of the Sawhorse just behind its head. Next he brought a piece of rock from the road and hammered the post firmly into the animal's back. "Stop, stop!" shouted the horse. "You're jarring me terribly." "Does it hurt?" asked the boy. "Not exactly hurt," answered the animal, "but it makes me quite nervous to be jarred." "Well, it's all over now," said Tip encouragingly. "Now, Jack, be sure to hold fast to this post, and then you can't fall off and get smashed." So Jack held on tight, and Tip said to the horse, "Get up." The obedient creature at once walked forward, rocking from side to side as he raised his feet from the ground. Tip walked beside the Sawhorse, quite content with this addition to their party. Presently he began to whistle. "What does that sound mean?" asked the horse. "Don't pay any attention to it," said Tip. "I'm just whistling, and that only means I'm pretty well satisfied." "I'd whistle myself if I could push my lips together," remarked Jack. "I fear, dear father, that in some respects I am sadly lacking." After journeying on for some distance, the narrow path they were following turned into a broad roadway paved with yellow brick. By the side of the road, Tip noticed a signpost that read, 9 miles to the Emerald City. But it was now growing dark, so he decided to camp for the night by the roadside and to resume the journey next morning by daybreak. He led the Sawhorse to a grassy mound upon which grew several bushy trees and carefully assisted the Pumpkinhead to alight. "I think I'll lay you upon the ground overnight," said the boy. "You'll be safer that way." "How about me?" asked the Sawhorse. "It won't hurt you to stand," replied Tip, "and as you can't sleep, you may as well watch out and see that no one comes near to disturb us." Then the boy stretched himself upon the grass beside the Pumpkinhead, and being greatly wearied by the journey, was soon fast asleep. Next time, Chapter 6, Jack Pumpkinhead's Ride to the Emerald City.